Good evening. Welcome to Reasonable Doubt. I'm Justin Harris, member of Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. Reasonable Doubt is a show that's produced by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association, the largest local bar association for criminal defense attorneys in the country. Tonight, we have hosts Carmen Rowe and Jimmy Ardoin. We also have special guest Sheriff Adrian Garcia. Sheriff Garcia is the most well-known public official in law enforcement in Harris County in Houston. He's going to talk to us tonight about his body cam program that he's rolling out. He's also going to talk to us about policies in the jail, as well as his officers and deputies' interactions with the community. Jimmy?
Thanks, Justin. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to HCCLA Reasonable Doubt. We are graced with the presence of the Harris County Sheriff this evening, Adrian Garcia. As Justin said, it's going to be a great show. We've got a lot of good topics to discuss. And we're going to take your calls about 8:30. You can call in. We'll flash the number at the bottom of the screen. We're also going to be taking your questions on Twitter all evening at HCCLA_TV. That's at HCCLA_TV. I really encourage everybody to get involved on Twitter because we get some great questions and we will read them and ask them of our guests on the air. So please send us your questions. It is my pleasure to welcome my substitute co-host tonight. Normally you see her giving the introduction. Carmen Rowe, how are you this evening?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here with the sheriff tonight.
Any nerves sitting in that chair versus standing over there?
Well, you know, it's easier to sit than it is to stand, but Justin did a fantastic job, so I might be out of work, so forward.
Well, I think your job's safe. You do a fine job introducing us every week, except when you have more important events to go to, such as last week. One thing I want to discuss, you know, Damon and I, we usually do our current events. I know you have a big current event that was in the news this week, and as the president of the HCCLA organization, I want you to kind of fill us all in on what went on with the DA's office and the newly created Houston Forensic Science Center.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I was very happy to learn and proud that the Houston Forensic Science Center put out a press release in combination with the Harris County District Attorney's Office letting us know about a Brady notice having to do with a fingerprint expert coming from Georgia who 9 years ago had an issue that was important enough to get it out to the community. I reached out to the Houston Forensic Science Center, who you know. We've had Scott Hochberg here on the show along with his people, and you know, I encourage them to send out press releases in the future and to continue to make that public information. I think it would really set us apart as leaders in the community, in the Harris County DA's office as well as in the labs, if we took a more public stance on Brady notices.
Now, good news, bad news, we kind of got that, but we also got the mix of some allegations of some misconduct in the DA's office over the last week or two. Can you tell everybody what the source of that probe, if you will, is?
Which misconduct are we talking about?
I guess we should kind of narrow it down. There was an allegation of some failure to produce Brady material in a case. So we kind of have the good news of the science lab who is doing this in conjunction with the DA's office. But then on the other hand, we have the DA's office a question about whether or not they did actually provide Brady material or withhold Brady material in that case. And so, I mean, kind of a double-edged sword on this one.
Well, my position is that having looked at things over the last year since the Michael Morton Act was implemented, I think there's no question that the Brady issues have become much more prevalent. And so new training and changes in the way that we do Brady is going to be necessary. And so I'm glad that the labs and the DA's office are taking, you know, a step in the right direction and changing the way that we do things.
And I know as the president of the organization, you have a very hands-on approach to getting involved with the DA's office and knowing what's going on with the training. What do you get the sense? Is there any new training going on in place to train prosecutors coming up on Brady disclosures? Is that part of what we're seeing here? And if so, what kind of changes are they making within the office to help younger prosecutors learn about these disclosures and when to make them?
Yeah, and to my knowledge right now, I don't know that there's any new training that's happened yet, but I know that Devin Anderson and Dick Bax and the people at the top of the the office have discussed the need for that, and I think that it's going to be forthcoming, which is very encouraging. And this step in the right direction regarding this Brady notice in a press release, I think is extremely encouraging as regards the direction that they're looking at going as far as Brady notices. I mean, making them public helps everyone involved, law enforcement, the labs, pro se, individuals, as well as criminal defense attorneys. So I commend their efforts, and I hope that they continue to be innovative and push forward to start making Brady much more of a priority and to, again, lead, the state as far as how we turn over Brady evidence.
Well, hopefully this is a step in the right direction, and we'll see more things like this coming from both the DA's office and any other law enforcement agency that has exculpatory material to turn over to the defense. I want to turn now to our guest, Sheriff Adrian Garcia. Welcome to the program this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate you joining us. I want to kind of get into, I guess, being the sheriff of Harris County is a bit like being Batman in the sense that it's a 24-hour job.
It is. In fact, there's sometimes I get plenty of sleep, and there's some that I don't. So, but look, I tell you that it's a great opportunity to serve the citizens of Harris County. You get to serve an incredibly diverse community, and so there's days that are challenging, but there's far more greater days that are rewarding. And so I just try to look at the glass half full rather than half empty.
Now, for those who may not know, who may only know you as the sheriff, give our audience a little sense of your background. How did you start? How did you get into law enforcement? And ultimately, how did you become the sheriff of Harris County?
Well, thanks to my mom. She's the one that encouraged me to look at a career in the Houston Police Department like my big brother. And my older brother was already a Houston police officer, and she knew I was working for my dad at the time, who had an automotive shop, and she said, you're just not happy. You got to think about doing something like your brother. So with her encouragement, I applied at the ripe old age of 19, got accepted, started my career with HPD back in 1980, started patrolling the streets of Houston. My first assignment was working nights in Acres Homes and then Greenspoint, and then worked throughout other parts of the city. But in my 23-year career with the Houston Police Department, it also involved being the director of the city's anti-gang office when first Mayor Lanier asked me to help start the office, and then Mayor Brown appointed me as the director of that office. And that gave me another perspective of policy issues and how to work with a number of different elements of city government, state government, and county government. And then I decided to do something much more dangerous than police work. I decided to run for public office. And so I got elected to Houston City Council in 2003. I took office in January 1st of 2004. Served for 5 years. I was the chair of the city's Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, and I was also the chair of the city's Minority Women Business Enterprise Committee and vice chair of several others. But Mayor White, who I served with, asked me to serve as his mayor pro tem, his vice mayor, and I did that honorably, and I was proud that and humbled that he asked me to serve in that capacity, because presumably, if he got hit by a bus, then I had the tiger by the tail. But then I decided to take my public service to a different realm and asked the permission of the citizens to serve in this capacity as a sheriff. And so I was elected in 2008, took office in 2009, and it's been a whirlwind ever since.
Now, since you've taken the job in 2009, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to undertake at the office, either starting from scratch, implementing, or any of the biggest challenges that you've seen over the last six years?
Well, nothing is more challenging than taking a budget that's out of control. The budget was $60 million over budget. $40 million of that was overtime. We had an overcrowded jail. I had 11,400 inmates in my custody. However, the jail capacity at the time was 9,434. So we were shipping people to the state of Louisiana, 2,000 inmates, and it was costing taxpayers roughly about $60 million to pay for that overage, that overcapacity. And so I had a number of issues to contend with. coupled with the fact that our ranks were thin. We had, I think I inherited about 300 vacancies throughout the organization, detention officers, deputies, nurses, clerks, you name it, there was an opening for it. And so a lot of issues coming in, drinking from the fire hose, as they say. And but the beauty of focusing on those issues that matter to the community is that today we're no longer overcrowded. We haven't been overcrowded in several years. We're averaging about 8,800 inmates, and we've been averaging that thereabout for the last several years. We're no longer having to ship people out anywhere because we're no longer overcrowded. And I like to remind people of that because not being overcrowded doesn't necessarily mean that you're arresting less people. But rather, I had a particular perspective that, you know, there's a purpose for public safety, there's a purpose for law enforcement. Yes, people make mistakes, but ultimately, the county jail should be a place where we also facilitate public safety, and that essentially means if someone did something wrong, then how do we help them not do it anymore? And so we have built an incredible amount of reentry programs, which basically means that the folks in my custody will come back out to the community. So how do we return them much better than how we got them? And so working on education programs, vocational programs, we've even done job fairs in the county jail. Because my attitude, very simply, is that if we don't want people to do things illegally, then we have to really challenge ourselves and our business partners to allow people to do things legally.
Now, you said that the overcrowding isn't necessarily a factor of less arrests. But so I want to know, what exactly was it that you implemented, or what did you do to reduce the numbers and solve the overcrowding problem?
You know, one of the things that we did was, first of all, look at the fact that, we had originally the system that I inherited had deemed almost every inmate as a maximum security risk, and they weren't. So we re-engineered and asked for permission to the State Jail Commission to look at our classification model. When we implemented a new model, we found a lot more minimum security inmates, which qualified them to participate in our education and vocation programs. When we looked at that, we figured, there ought to be a carrot, kind of thing here. We want people to do better things. We want people to be better. We want to empower them with a better skill set. So why not attach a 3-for-1 credit to those education and vocation opportunities, those work opportunities? We had historically been giving 2-for-1, 2 days credit for time served. Well, we upped it for certain inmates to 3-for-1. And so that allowed us to reward inmates for getting their GED, rewarding inmates for getting their vocation certification, all in hopes that that would be, a skill set that they can go out and market and hopefully earn an honest living and keep them from coming back into the county jail. But it was essentially through a lot of study, and I had to bring in business consultants to take a look at that process, because there wasn't a whole lot of consensus within the organization on how to approach that. So it took really people outside the force, if you will, to look at our operations, look at our policies, and then implement new ways of doing business. But 3-for-1 was essentially one of those opportunities that we did for those minimum security inmates who were working, who were getting educated, who were getting training and skill sets. Why not?
And don't you have a weekend program that's also, I don't know if you touched on that. Do you mind sharing that program?
Yeah, exactly. One of the most hilarious things for me was that we used to have inmates that we called weekenders. Monday through Friday, we didn't know where they're at. We didn't know what they were doing. We didn't know what they were up to. We didn't have anybody surveying them. But yet on Friday, they had to turn themselves in and cost my operations an incredible amount of money to be processed just as if they had, robbed the bank minutes ago or committed some other serious crime. We had to process them in, and then within 48 hours, begin that same process all over again to let them out. It didn't make any sense to me, especially if we weren't caring about them between Monday and Friday. So working with the judges, we decided to look at how we really think about that. And ultimately, the judges just want to give the citizens justice, and I'm cool with that. So we really thought about how we could put those weekenders to work, give the community justice, let the judges be able to have sentences and sanctions on individuals who were making mistakes, but obviously who weren't, an incredible risk to the community. So that weekend program has allowed us to peel away another tier of our population and never bring them into the jail to begin with, but rather put them to work. They had to report, they had to show up, and if they didn't show up, there's consequences for that.
I want to ask you a little bit about the bonding process, because you talked about processing inmates in and processing them out, and that takes a lot of manpower on your part to do that. And there's a lot of defense lawyers and a lot of community activists who think that a lot of money and resources could be saved by granting PR bonds in low-level cases.
I agree. In fact, I've been an advocate to not necessarily give them. I don't want to give things that people shouldn't get if they're a risk to the community. But I really have been an advocate for challenging our thought process on how we do that. And 70% of my jail population, 70% are in pretrial status, meaning they're not guilty, they haven't gone before a judge, but yet they haven't been able to make bond for some reason.
Do you have any idea how many of those are held on like $1,000 or less bond that they can't even make?
I don't have the numbers for you right at this moment, but nonetheless, when you have that many people in pretrial status, and a small number of them can make bond. There's been the argument that, well, the people who qualify for them are getting them. But I venture to say that we need to take a stronger look at it. We have to really challenge ourselves to see whether we're really using that process, keeping in mind that a good number of people in the county jail are poor. They are functioning at the poverty level. And so they may not necessarily have the resources that someone else does who's got a little bit more income and has a attorney on retainer. Maybe they can't exercise some of those options that some other folks can have. But maybe if not for a little bit of a few more resources, they could walk out just like anybody else can. And so I think for the sake of justice and for the sake of treating people fairly, we need to take a look at it.
Have you had any conversations with the judges about the implementation of a PR bond system? And if so, how have those conversations gone, and why has the system not been implemented?
I think you'll have to ask other people why it hasn't been implemented, but I have raised the issue on a number of occasions, and I continue to raise the issue. If at the end of the day, somebody brings me a good study and says, here's the reason why it can't be done, I'm cool with it. But I want to make sure that we sit down at the table, roll our sleeves up, and look at whether it really can be attained. And I think that we've got a new pretrial services director. I think it's going to be, hopefully this will be on their agenda, and I think it is, and I think we may see some new results out of that.
Yeah.
What do you think about the marijuana, small amounts of marijuana in the trace cases, and what amount of space they're taking up as far as pretrial defendants in the jail?
On the trace cases, when then District Attorney Likas took a look at it, my initial reaction, being an old beat cop, was, oh, wait a minute, what are we doing? Are you out of your mind? But then when I heard her argument of justice, and ultimately it was that if a person should have the reasonable expectation to have evidence tested and retested, then why were we holding people whose evidence we knew wouldn't meet that threshold of transparency? And so when she posed it to me in that fashion, it made sense. I didn't like it as a street cop, didn't like it, but it made sense. And so on that point, I think it had a valid argument. And but today, thankfully, you know, part of the issue for me back then was that a lot of those cases were being sentenced to the county jail and were using a lot of space. That has not been the case anymore, where they're not occupying as much space as they used to. I still want to challenge the process and make sure that we're being more thoughtful about it, but it's been a big change since I first took over the jail.
I guess the big thing we want to talk about tonight is the body cams, and it kind of dovetails into a lot of different subjects. Because obviously this week we had a little bit of an incident with some deputies who have been relieved that was captured on a cell phone camera. The whole incident was captured on cell phone camera, and it kind of put another black eye, so to speak, on law enforcement in the way some officers have treated suspects and people who have been detained. And so I know it's an ongoing investigation. I want to get your thoughts as much as you can talk about the ongoing investigation of that, but also with an eye towards, here's a situation where we do have it all on camera, and I know your office is moving toward and implementing body cameras as we speak. And so I kind of want to get your thoughts first on the incident of this week to the extent you can.
Well, it is an open investigation, and it is one that we want to demonstrate to the public that when people bring issues to us, we act on them, and we act on them as quickly as we possibly can. The concern I have with what has happened is that, look, there's just so many tailwinds, if you will, on our officers doing their jobs appropriately. I believe a great majority of them are. I believe rather more show up every single day to play by the rules, put their lives in harm's way for the right reasons, for the reasons that they raised up their hand and took an oath of office and swore to their God that they were there to serve their community and do the right thing for the right reasons for the right people. So when an issue like this happens, it just puts a dent in everybody's, ideal of being a good law enforcement, public servant leader. It just hurts us all. And no one likes to see these things happen. To that end, that's why I've been a big proponent for body cams. That's why I thank and have been openly grateful to Madam District Attorney Devin Anderson for her willingness to dip into her pocket and share her resources with the Houston Police Department and the Harris County Sheriff's Office. It was a big, reward, if you will, to the bonus for the Sheriff's Office to be able to get her resources to move our project forward. And so we're going to continue to move as quickly as we can, given all the things that we have to contend with. The project has now grown massively. We're looking at making sure that we have a county approach to body cams, if you will, because ultimately the District Attorney's Office is going to be a big stakeholder in all that evidence. And so we want to think very carefully how HPD, the county agencies, the Sheriff's Office, and then ultimately every other agency that is going to think about deploying them, it's going to give the District Attorney's Office a sort of standards, if you will, requirements, specifications for other agencies to get online with their respective programs. And so we're moving that forward. But at the end of the day, I think the body cams would resolve a lot of these challenges. If anything, it's going to vindicate officers, and otherwise it's going to demonstrate to agencies that we have some challenges that we have to contend with. But I'm hopeful that it will give everyone another level of transparency. It won't be the cure-all, because as Carmen has already seen, depending on where that camera sits, on the shoulder, on the body, on the eyes, depends on how just visible the video is going to be. It's not going to be like on TV. It's not going to be like in the movies. It's going to be reality.
And if I could, I think we have some images for our audience so they can
Yeah.
see what your body cams look like. And if I'm not mistaken, the Harris County Sheriff's Office is implementing their own program, their own software, their own testing, separate and apart from HPD or any other agency.
That's correct.
And I think we have a picture up right now, and it looks to me, Sheriff, like a lot of these body cams are being worn kind of on the chest area of your officers.
That's correct.
And so I guess explain to us, for those of us who are kind of a little tech geeks, what kind of camera it is. What kind of angle does it give? I mean, are we going to get a very narrow view? Are we going to get a wider view? What are we looking at here?
The cameras that so far we're testing, I mean, they give you pretty much a real human peripheral vision, scope of vision, if you will. It gives you, from all the samples that I've seen, it gives you, it puts you right in the boots and shoes of that officer. It gives you a pretty good perspective of what is in their line of sight. It gives you a good indication what's could be within their peripheral vision. It's not just within 2 feet of in front of that camera, but it gives you a pretty good scope of what the human eye would likely be seeing. Some of the technology is very new. And so we're seeing some of the technology that has difficulty in transitioning from extreme night to light, daytime or with light. We're seeing how, depending on where that camera sits, if you decide to wear the eyepiece cameras or the shoulder, well, let's talk about the shoulder and the body. It gives you a good dimension of what the body is facing, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what the deputy may be looking at and reacting to.
Sure.
The eyepiece does, but boy, does it get you dizzy. Because if you're out there,
Your head's swiveling.
your head is swiveling. You're looking, right and left, up and down, and so that camera is moving with you, and it's just reacting to all that, and so it's very challenging to watch at times. And so, but in either regard, the idea of having that camera that not only records what it's seeing, but it's recording what it's hearing. And I think to some of the recent challenges, I think it's going to give us an incredible amount of insight. It's going to give us, I think, a layer of transparency that would be appreciated by all involved. I think it's going to support the tough job that deputies have to do on a day-in, day-out basis. And maybe on occasion it's going to vindicate citizens who have a concern with what that interaction was like.
And if I could, let me ask you about the citizen interactions regarding these cameras. I think we can all agree that the policy around the cameras is going to be one of the most important things to protect both the officers and the citizens, so that we have some transparency without too much discretion by the officers. And so specifically, I'd like to talk about the video with Mr. Valentine, which talked about microphones that are worn by officers and maybe what the policy is, whether they're turned on and off. And I know we've talked a lot about dash cams and that they are turned on and off at times, and whether or not these body cams are going to be turned on and off, at the discretion of the officers, and what type of policies you're looking at, and whether you're mindful of those concerns, and if so, how we're going to prevent, the discretionary use of those body cams.
One of the things, Carmen, and I want to thank you and other community leaders who have been in my office to have a look at how our policy is being structured, because I want to make sure that there's not any ambiguity as to what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve good evidence for prosecution's sake. We're trying to achieve good evidence to support the important work that officers are being asked to do. And we're trying to achieve transparency as well. But by the same token, we do have a breadth of circumstances that we can think about today, and probably haven't thought of all the circumstances that we may confront. But right now, the circumstances that we have thought about is, what if you're dealing with a sexual assault victim? Maybe the camera needs to go off. What if you're talking to someone who says, I've got information and I want to divulge it to this notorious drug dealer down the street. Maybe it needs to go off. What if you're dealing with a juvenile who's been abused or assaulted? Maybe we need to turn it off. So those are some of the things that make sense right now. And so the scope of circumstances where we're going to give officers the discretion to turn them off, it's going to be very limited. It's going to be very limited. The scope of where officers will be turning them on and required to turn them on will be almost in every action that they're undertaking. Traffic stop, self-initiated investigation, being dispatched, separate and apart from the fact that their patrol car will likely have a car cam. And so it's all, we're going to have a number of levels of evidence to cull through if we ever have to.
So most people may not know this, but dash cams on most officer vehicles, when they have them there, as soon as they activate their overhead lights, the camera automatically turns on. There's no discretion at all. And so the Valentine case was a little concerning to me because they mentioned whether or not, one of the officers asked the other whether or not he had his mic on, and the officer said no. And so as a criminal defense attorney, I'm concerned that if I'd subpoenaed the records, the dash cam or whatever, that if he didn't turn that mic on, I'd never know that any of those conversations occurred. Now this is very common for a criminal defense attorney. And so if the mics can be turned on and off with ease under circumstances that might be necessary that they be on to protect both the citizen and the officers, I wonder if that same situation could occur with body cams, and if not, how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
The body cams, I don't believe it will be possible, because when you turn on the device, you're turning on all aspects of the device. As you saw, even when you turn on the device, the body cam, so far the technology that we're testing actually goes back and picks up 30 seconds worth of visual data, what it could have recorded
Prior to the time it was turned on.
Prior to the time it was turned on. And then it starts recording from the time you actually turned it on, or starts recording audio from the time that you actually turn it on. So it's, in that aspect, the technology is going to be pretty powerful, and I think it's going to help us a great deal. And if in our, the technology is coming with an incredible amount of tracking capabilities, and so it's going to be, not to tell you that someone may not turn their camera off, but they're going to have to answer for it.
So that you would know when a stop occurs, and then whether or not that camera was on or off.
There's going to be issues that we will have to that will be correlated with one another. Did you get dispatched? Yes, I did. Did you turn on your body cam at the time? Yes, I did. And we're going to be able to know that or not.
Okay.
I want to get to our first call of the evening. Hello, welcome to HCCLA Reasonable Doubt.
Hello. Good show. I'm calling about the upcoming budget cuts with $50 a barrel oil. We know they're coming. If this is going to last a couple of years like it's expected to. Also, you have the DEA getting the budget acts falling on them, and to where they had to repurpose and lay off of the, for instance, the cartel activity growing in the United States, and DEA got turned into diversion, which goes after patients and doctors. So they had to repurpose themselves they all know the budget acts is coming now, but with this cheap oil for a couple of years, it's going to come heavily, and besides that, with sequestration. Thank you.
Is there a question in there?
I think he was asking about the budget cuts that are coming.
I guess there was no budget. I just got my budget approved. It didn't get cut. It didn't get expanded as much as I wanted, but it didn't get cut. But I think, his point is that, the price of oil has dropped.
Yeah.
And that's obviously going to have an impact on the local economy at some point. And look, in 2009, no one gave me a memo that we were going to walk into a recession.
Right.
And we went through a hiring freeze, a forced hiring freeze, which I totally hated. I lost about 150 deputies in the time frame of that hiring freeze, which lasted for about 2 years or so. And so we've been through those challenges. We will deal with them again if it were to happen. I'm grateful that I didn't have to lay off any employees, unlike other agencies. So we will maintain priorities, and we will manage the resources that we're given. But you know what was most impressive to me during the recession that we were in, and that was that, you know, I had a lot of conversations, interactions with my employees. Nobody was saying, why do what we do? You know, we don't have the money, we don't have enough people, so why do we even try? Instead, they were bringing conversations like, can we do this because that'll help us do more right now while we don't have as many people, and then later on when we start hiring. I mean, there was a lot of dedication, and I'm proud of my employees who stuck it through the recession. You know, we didn't see a spike in crime during that tough time, and look, I was in a patrol car the last time Houston had a real serious budget crunch, and that was in the early 80s. And so I've been there, done that, and unlike that time and the most recent recession, in the 80s, crime went through the roof, homicide rate went through the roof. We lost a number of police officers in line of duty. We didn't experience the same thing this last time around. I think that has a lot to do with training, thoughtfulness, policies, approaches, priority setting, and if we have to, we'll do it again.
Sheriff, I want to go back to the body cam for a little bit. Because
this feels like a cross-examination.
Well, there was just some things that I wanted to follow up on before we.
I'm just kidding.
I know, it's my nature. What can I say? But you talked about putting in policies in place, and what I'd like to know is, who is it that is it just your office and your internal policies, or is it working with the DA's office and the county attorney? Because this is evidence, and it could be evidence not just in criminal cases, but in civil cases.
Oh, it likely will be.
And so I'd like to know who's setting the policies.
Everybody.
Everybody is.
Everybody is. I mean, what I'm proud of is the fact that they're looking to my policies as a model to work with. And so that tells me that we've been very thoughtful. We've been very broad in our thinking. We wanted to really achieve transparency. We wanted to achieve good best practice. We wanted to be thoughtful about, why did the body cam conversation ever come to be? That's where we started from, and so.
And let me just say, I spent some time with Sheriff Garcia, and he went over his entire body cam policy with me. And so Sheriff Garcia has his body cams, his policy. It's all just within the sheriff's office, and I understand HPD is coming up with a separate policy, and so on and so forth. So it's very fractured at this point. Sheriff Garcia has been very transparent with his policy, and it doesn't surprise me that people are using it as a model. And he's invited us and other people to participate in the conversations as they develop the policy. And so you're developing all of that right now and testing the cameras, whether they're better on the chest or on the shoulder or whatever. And you talked a little bit about, and speaking of budgets, that you have the reason these cameras haven't been implemented in Houston sooner is because we didn't have the funding, and that Devin Anderson has given you the opportunity to have so many cameras. Talk about how many cameras that money is actually going to put on the streets, and then what you plan to do to get the rest of the cameras out there.
My hope is that the cameras, if everything continues as we intend, I will have every patrol deputy assigned with a body cam. Every patrol deputy, and that's not all my deputies that are out in the field, but it is the core group of individuals who are doing traffic stops, who are receiving calls, who are interacting with citizens, who are dealing with suspects and victims and things of that nature. It's that core group of people. Now, they're going forward, assuming we get all that rolled out in a reasonable time frame. My idea is to go after federal grants or state grants, wherever there may be a grant. We're going to be grant, hunting. And if we happen to make additional seizures, we'll use our asset forfeiture to the extent that we can. But my goal is to have body cams fully deployed in all the places within the organization that it makes sense, including the jail.
And so right now you have 100 on the streets. Is that about right?
No, we have about just under 50.
50, okay.
Yeah.
And you're hoping to get to, was it 900?
900.
Am I remembering? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's how much the money has paid for, and then that's
Exactly.
how far we have to go.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But you know, real quickly, let me also just say that I've got an incredible appetite to get these cameras rolled out and get them all placed out there. But just as we've been seeing with the demonstrations, that we're learning a great deal, and so we want to be thoughtful as we move forward, and making sure that one, we get technology that we're all, and I say all, defense, community, law enforcement, prosecution, that we all can count on. There's a lot of technology and everybody's selling right now because they know that this is a big issue across the country. But we want to make sure that we ultimately hang our hat on the best possible technology. That is going to make me pump my brakes, if you will, a little bit to make sure that I don't just get overly aggressive just for the deployment and not be thoughtful about storage, not be thoughtful about the fact is that the devices that we're testing right now takes a patrolman off the streets almost for an hour to dock his device, because it is a hard docking and transferring of the data that he or she has recorded in their shift. And so we need to, and so we're looking at how to do these things wirelessly. We're trying to, so it's caused us to take a look at other elements of our operations that we didn't really anticipate doing. But we're going to continue to stay on course, all for the sake of giving the community what they expect, giving law enforcement what it needs, and then hopefully it gives us all good common ground.
And there's a good question on Twitter along the lines of the cost and everything. Tyler Flood, who was a guest of ours a few weeks ago, another lawyer and member of HCCLA, asks, he heard around the courthouse that a deputy in the courtroom had told him that the GoPro cameras that you can buy at Best Buy are actually better quality and cheaper than the devices that are being provided.
Yeah.
So what's the response to that?
I don't know the GoPro camera, but you know, we want to make sure, and we're going to take a look at all kinds of technology. Mm-hmm. But I'm not familiar with it. I'm not the person making the decision on the technology. I'm letting the technology experts pick the right technology. And we have to look at durability. We have to be able to look at, you know, night and day transition. We have to look at, you know, recording capacity, because I want my staff to have these devices turned on when they're working off duty. And so there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So I'm not necessarily discounting the GoPro camera. I know that a few guys have gotten them out there. They bought them themselves. I think they're like under $100, which is pretty commendable. But that also comes with a price.
Sure. We have another call coming in, so I want to get to our call. Hello, welcome to HCCLA Reasonable Doubt.
Hello. I have a question regarding the limitation of the scope of the information gathered on the cameras. So far, I've listened to a good conversation about stops on traffic tickets and things of this sort. But what about if we have a search warrant into a house and, I don't know, 5 or 6 officers go in the house? Can the district attorney come back later and say, well, let's really scour this data now and see what else we can find that went on in this person's house. Let's look for other things, other contraband or other violations, other than just the primary scope of the crime. I guess you'd say it's covered under the warrant.
Yeah. Good question. In fact, I posed that to Carmen when we were going through this, and that this is you know, again, we're not fully anticipating or realizing what we could anticipate out of this new technology, and so we're going to learn a lot. You're going to help us come to some good places, and in some places we may not necessarily disagree. And so I'll have to go to my stakeholder, and that'd be the district attorney's office and the county attorney's office. But you know, these are good questions, and it's a new conversation in the criminal justice arena that body cams is going to create. And I can't even tell you what we ought to anticipate and whether it should be yes or whether it should be no. I think we're going to start in a lot of places. We may not necessarily end at the same place.
And I guess the body cam issue, really, what it boils down to, it's a kind of a small part of a broader issue, and that's police community relations, and the struggle that we're having right now, particularly in the last couple of years, with a lot of incidents nationwide, police getting a really bad rap for their interaction with people, particularly the most recent events in Missouri and New York, where individuals died at the hands of police. We've seen protests and everything else. I want to know, in terms of your office and your role as the sheriff, what types of things are you doing to improve community relations between the public and police?
Well, most recently, you may have seen my first Sikh deputy. And that came, from a tough circumstance. I wasn't the sheriff at the time, but it happened after my election. And this is where the organization hadn't trained the deputies on understanding the Sikh community. As a result, the entire family got handcuffed, and all because the part of training that we did emphasize, which was officer safety, did kick in. Well, now we've learned a lot. We've put policies. We've done training. We've broadened our scope, our understanding of the community that we're responsible for. And we put up not only a program, but we've put an attitude in place. And talking as an officer who had the honor and the privilege when I was a young cop to be able to patrol a community and actually get to stop and say, hey, Carmen, see you got a nice German Shepherd over there. How what's his name? I was able to have those kind of conversations when I was a beat cop. Our deputies today, because of how much we have grown, don't necessarily have that opportunity anymore. And I think that because we've been so busy trying to do the job, that we have let an important part of the job fall to the side, and that is our building and maintaining our relationship with the community. And so I have put programs in place. I've put training in place. I have focused a great deal on individual leadership, reminding our deputies that, no one ought to have to be there to tell you to do certain things. You ought to think about them because it's the right thing for the right reason, for the right people, and ultimately you're in charge when there's no one else in the room to be in charge for you. And so I've tried to focus a great deal on reminding and reawakening the consciousness of why we're doing this job to begin with, why we were excited to help people, why we were excited to go save children and help women and help folks across the street and do all those honorable things. I want to remind us that's why we stepped into this job. In spite of all the challenges that we got, I'm trying to still find that idealistic person in that uniform. And I think when we do that, I think it reminds us that we have an important relationship with the broader community, rich and poor, healthy and mentally ill, clean and addicted. We are all in it together. And so the reentry programs that I built is to remind our jail staff that, our job, while we have folks, is to do what we can to help them get back on the straight and narrow. I spend a great deal of time, the intro that y'all gave me was I'm the most visible law enforcement official, because I think it's part of my job to be out in the community, hearing what folks have to say, and then taking that input and figuring out what we need to be doing more these days. And so it's never ending. I haven't done everything I would like to do, but at the end of the day, making sure that folks believe that we're committed to transparency, making sure that people believe that we're committed to being the honorable public servants that I know we are, and demonstrate actions towards those goals. I think ultimately people know that we're not going to be perfect, but as long as they see that we're committed to improvement, I think it helps us get through the tough times.
There's a lot of critics out there who say that over the last decade or more that police departments have geared more towards almost a paramilitary operation, and that they're acquiring these heavy-duty vehicles, these SWAT vehicles, militaristic type of armories and everything else. That they've gotten away from the original purpose of being a police officer and serving the community, protecting and serving the community. And that the attitude is now of the public is that these guys are out to just enforce laws and take us down. Do you think that is the public perception of what police officers today are?
I don't think that's the greater public perception. I know that that's a perception out there, but I think that there are other folks out there that recognize that we live in a day that, unlike when I started my career, terrorism was something you saw in a movie. It wasn't something that you had to talk about as a police officer. But it's something we have to talk about today. And then we have realities that when I was a young policeman, if you took a 2-shot Derringer off of someone out on the street, you were dealing with Al Capone. Today, my guys are up against AK-47s. They're up against AR-15s. I have a deputy who, thank God, is still with us today after someone took a round to his, or several rounds to his patrol car. One of them made it through his, the hood of his, front end of his patrol car, through his dash, and thankfully hit him in the strike plate. Had he not been wearing a strike plate, he had his bulletproof vest, but that bullet would not have stopped with his vest alone. He was wearing his strike plate. He took the round, and thankfully in the strike plate, he survived. But that is today. That's a real reality. Now, we are all for free equipment. Trust me, in a tough budget process, I'm all for free stuff. But we're being very thoughtful as to what we're working to acquire from the military, and I think many agencies are. We're acquiring vehicles because, or high water vehicles because, you know what, it floods around this place. And so we need that for rescue operations. We've acquired a helicopter because it helps us patrol a vast and sprawling community. So that's the kind of equipment that we've been going after. There may be some criticism for other agencies. I'm not about to try to speak for them or against them, but I just want folks to know right here in Houston, Harris County, that the military equipment that we're after is to help us get through lean times. It makes sense. It's equipment that's still usable. We don't have 50 caliber machine guns. We don't have Laws rockets or bazookas. But
you have an armored car?
We have an armored car.
Just checking.
Yeah, because we have a high-risk operations unit, and sometimes we deploy that because we never know what other folks may be armed with. So I have to be also conscientious of the lives that I'm responsible for, and that's the guys and gals that wear my uniform every single day. So, there is that concern. There is that perception by certain members in the community. I don't think that is the general attitude of the public, but it's my job to make sure I'm educating the public as to what it is that we are doing and definitely what we're not.
So since you bring that up, and we're going to run out of time soon, I want to make sure we talk about encounters with law enforcement. And you and I have spoke about this, and it's an important question that I think we need to touch on, particularly in light of the audio tape that was recently released about asserting your right to refuse to consent to the search of your vehicle, to the right to remain silent, and other rights that everyone is afforded out on the streets, and how those rights intersect with the duties of a law enforcement officer, as well as the safety concerns that you just mentioned. Can you speak to what you would maybe advise a young minority man in Houston as to what you would suggest they do under circumstances where they want to assert their rights while still being respectful of the job that law enforcement needs to do?
It is a reoccurring question, and I've been in various forums where this has been talked about. And it's a very delicate issue because, you know, everybody knows who a police officer is because we're few and we're kind of obvious. But we don't know in a region of over 4 million people who we're interacting with on any given day. And so sometimes people may think that there's an improper interaction occurring, and they may feel compelled to speak their mind. And, you know, I want people to that if they've got a complaint, we want to hear about it. We want people to exercise their right. But I also want to make sure that I'm not creating any false expectations that we have an officer that's trying to do a job under, you know, time constraints that we're imposing on them, and you know, that everybody is expecting a perfect result out of. And so we want to make sure that folks know what we're telling our deputies, and that is that people have a constitutional right to record you. It is in my policy that folks have a constitutional right to do so. People, as we have seen, are walking around with video cameras and recording devices, and so it's our society today that we exist in. But that resisting arrest isn't, or interfering with an arrest isn't, just because someone is recording you from 20 feet away. People have a right to do that. And so just do your job well. Do it within policy, do it within law, and I think everything else will resolve itself.
And you have policies that cover individuals.
That's right. I do.
We're gonna try and squeeze one more phone call in here before our time is up. Hello, welcome to HCCLA Reasonable Doubt.
Todd DuPont. Hi, Sheriff Garcia.
What's up, Todd? Thanks for calling, man.
How are y'all? Well, I guess I asked a question I didn't get. Everybody okay?
You cut out there for a second.
I was just asking, how's everybody on the forum?
Outstanding.
We're doing great, man.
Yeah.
I'm freezing. It's cold in here.
Thank you for taking my call. I'll be quick. It looks like time may not permit. But Sheriff Garcia, you know that when I was president, I'd written you a letter. Last week we met with you about that with regards to the folks that are acquitted or perhaps no billed or cases dismissed. Any thoughts on your progress on that idea?
Todd, we met last week. I'm good. I ain't that good. Give me some time, because what you have asked me to look into is complicated, has a lot of different pieces to it, and I want to make sure I give you a good response. So your issue of what happens when folks are acquitted in the courtroom,
I think this is the problem is that people, once they are acquitted, are not being released straight from the courtroom.
Right.
They have to go back through processing.
Exactly.
Which can be a number of hours and so forth. And
exactly. So it makes sense to me what the concern is. I just cannot legitimately tell you why it can be done a different way. I need to talk to my staff. I want my staff to do the research. And then if the answer is that we don't have a good answer, then maybe Todd has scored a home run. I don't know, but I don't want to say the wrong thing without the right information.
Sure.
as long as you're committed to working towards a solution, or at least an answer, I think that's
all we can ask for, and that's all the time we have tonight. Sheriff, we appreciate you coming on and taking the time to discuss all these issues with us and answer some tough questions about these topics.
I have the right not to answer any more of your questions.
That's right, you absolutely do.
We'll respect that.
So we thank you very much for joining us, and we thank all of you, the viewers, and those of you who sent in questions on Twitter, and those of you who called us this evening. We really appreciate it. Keep the questions coming in, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Happy Lunar New Year.
Oh, and Happy Lunar New Year. That's right.
That's right.